My name is Justin, and I am a son of God and an addict, and the host of the RICO 12 speaker meeting. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I am sober one day at a time since June 19th, 2015. And for that, I am beyond grateful. Welcome to RICO 12. We are an organization whose addictions include alcohol, drugs, lust and sex, food and gambling, just to name a few. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to learn the similarities of addiction and to gain tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We invite recovering addicts with at least 1 year sobriety and who are actively working their recovery in their respective fellowships to share their experience, strength, and hope on a live Zoom webinar each Friday at noon Central Time for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of the speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. If you are hearing this meeting in recorded podcast form and would like to participate as a live audience member in the future, please go to www.rico12.com, that's RECO12.com, to learn more and submit your email address there to receive weekly invitations. RICO 12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping us working our 12th step in this manner. We gratefully accept contributions to help cover the cost of Zoom platform, podcast platform, web hosting, and administrative costs. To contribute, you can go to rico12.com /support, or you can click the link to PayPal that will be here in the chat of the live meeting and also in the show notes of the podcast. When you contribute, please specify the meeting number. This is meeting number 62. If you have not yet subscribed to or have not reviewed or rated RICO 12 in your podcast platform, please go and do it. Doing so really helps us work our 12th step by getting the word out to more people interested in recovery and in people interested in hearing others experience strength and hope. One more word about our speakers before we introduce today's speaker. When we line up a speaker for a meeting, we ask them to seek guidance on what and how to present so that they can reflect the light they have been given. That light will inspire hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now, let's introduce our guest speaker for today, Marcus B., whose topic will be the S-anon family illness. Now, Marcus B. from California is 26 years old, and he's been in recovery for 3 years, since 2018. He's a multidisciplinary addict, and Marcus shares from working the steps in Al-anon and S-anon to SA and SLAA. He shares from a standpoint of being engaged to be wed in recovery and now being a single father, co-parent, and dealing with the family illness of sexaholism and alcoholism while recovering from his own sex addiction. His life has changed dramatically in recovery while working an active program of recovery one day at a time. All right, Marcus, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thanks, Justin. Can you hear me all right? All right. Thanks for having me. And thanks for your great intros. You got that real smooth DJ voice. I'm always jealous of those voices. I want to start off with the S-anon problem, which is found on page 125 of our green book for S-anon. I'll just read this. The S-anon problem, the short version. S-anon members have much in common with the friends and relatives of other addicted people. Most of us grew up in families with secrets, and we were not taught to think about our own needs and take positive action to meet them. We chose friends and partners who could not or would not support and love us in a healthy way. We lived life from the standpoint of victims and perceived any personal criticism as a threat. For most of us, anger, fear, and depression were nearly constant. We acquired some unhealthy beliefs about ourselves very early in our lives, that we were not worthwhile and lovable, that we were able to control other people's behavior, and that sex was the most important sign of love. We have also felt the shame of thinking we were responsible for the sexaholic behavior of a family member or friend. Our self-esteem dropped to low levels, and we doubted our attractiveness, our emotions, and our sanity. We have felt betrayed by those we love the most. Many of us were sexually abused, exposed to diseases, and otherwise placed in physical danger. We were often too ashamed to ask for help. Some of us minimized the importance of the sexaholic behavior or denied it until we felt emotionally numb. Others focused on the sexaholic behavior to the point of obsession and tried every known method to control it. Some of us participated in sexual behavior that made us ashamed of ourselves or used sex to manipulate the sexaholic. Some of us misused drugs, alcohol, or food, and others kept so busy that we didn't have time to feel our emotions. We often neglected our health, our jobs, and our children. No matter how we tried to struggle against it, deny it, or minimize its effects, the failure of our efforts to cope with sexaholism brought us to the point of despair. This is what we mean when we say in the first step, our lives had become unmanageable. So I just want to talk a little bit about my story. I did not come into S-anon. It wasn't my first go around coming into the rooms of S-anon. I entered the rooms of recovery through SA. And like many in that, and I'm still in that program. It's my main program. I sponsor others in that program. I've worked the steps, and I meet with my sponsor regularly. Now, when I came into recovery through SA, had the gun against my back. I had a fiance. She was pregnant, 5 months pregnant, caught me having another set of affairs, and finally said, get help or get out. So I went into SA. I went to a therapist who I lied to consistently. And after a few sessions, she said, I'm going to read you the 20 questions. These questions, I answered yes to every single one of them. And I entered the rooms of SA. And I don't want to talk too much about my story there. I just want to say I was trying to do half measures. I wasn't willing to. I was the youngest guy there, coming in at age 23. I'm not as bad as they are, looking at all the differences, just thinking that I was not a real addict, thinking that I can control and enjoy it. I just wanted to stop the worst of my behaviors, and self-will would win the day. So about a year into the program or into the fellowship, my life finally hit a wall when my son's mom left me. She found something in my car, a journal, scribblings of contemplating suicide, more affairs, and she left me. So I finally hit a wall. I started to work the steps there with the sponsor. And what I mean by hit a wall is I had that feeling of wanting to take my own life. I felt like it was just, my life was at that point, at that brink. My bottom, as it's described. And I started to work the steps in that program with the sponsor. And the sponsor that I had in that program, he was also in a couple other fellowships. And he ended up taking me to my first Al-anon meeting. And this was late 2019. I went and I was just, I thought it was nice. It was an all men's meeting. I could identify with some of the shares, but I denied the effects of alcoholism that permeated throughout my family. And I just thought, my family drinks, but there's no issue. So I went to meetings for a few months. And finally, I broke out of denial. I got a sponsor. I started working the steps in that program. And I started to see how the family illness affected me. And one of my mentors in recovery, who lives in Kentucky, one thing he said to me was, Marcus, not only are we afflicted with the allergy to the illness, we're also affected by the family illness. And I'm affected. So through working the steps in Al-anon, I saw how I really punished my family. I saw how I had some unhealthy beliefs about myself, about how relationships worked growing up in an environment of alcoholism. And I saw how it really caused a lot of emotional disruption. I was confusing caring with controlling. I was confusing love with interference. I thought if you loved me, then you agreed with me. And if you don't love me, you don't agree with me. It was just this black and white sort of alcoholic home disruption that I carried with me, and one thing in the Anon programs before I came into S-anon was that my Al-anon sponsor would say things to me like, Marcus, we attract our emotional equals. And what I realized that being sober in SA, working a program of recovery, there was something that my sponsor told me when I told him, we're going through some fourth step work, I think. And I said, yeah, I'm the guy who's in the room. I'm the guy who's eyeing all the women, who's going after the kill. I'm the shark in the water. And my sponsor stopped me and said, Marcus, you're not the shark in the water. You're the chum in the water. You're sitting chum for another sex addict to come and swallow you up. Because as in our literature, it says that first we're addicts, then we're love cripples. And that's what I developed at a very young age. I was a love cripple, and I'll get into some of that right now. But I just want to talk how I came in S-anon. So I went through the Al-anon, and understanding the family illness of alcoholism, I realized that through some of the shares, a lot of the shares, they would talk about being attracted to alcoholics. They're picker would be attracted to that sort of alcoholic personality. And I, through doing a sex inventory a few times, I realized a lot of my partners, girlfriends, ex, my son's mother, they didn't have problems drinking. What I realized is that early on in my early relationships, I had a lot of sexaholic partners, partners that exhibited sexaholic behavior. And I was the one that was cheated on. I was the one that was trying to control, and I felt unworthwhile and unlovable. I thought I could control it with ultimatums. So I'll get into some of that. But understanding, I started to have this realization that my picker doesn't find alcoholics. My picker finds other sex addicts. And before I came into S-anon, there was a convention that I went to virtually in Atlanta, that I listened to, and they had a topic that they had a bunch of single sexaholics that were sharing on the topic of dating. And through observing all their shares, what I found is that they were all dating and came to realize that they were dating other sexaholics, like, people that were either untreated or in recovery themselves. And I saw that was me. So I reached out to a few members in my SA fellowship. I said, hey, is there any S-anon meetings? I just started to look for S-anon, and I couldn't find anything locally. And I was put in touch with Kevin H., which you've had on this podcast. And Kevin H. introduced me to an all men's S-anon group. And I've started working the steps with a sponsor in that particular fellowship. And it is probably the hardest program that I have been working the steps in. There's so much, because with Al-anon, I'm faced with alcohol. There's kind of this divergent. You're looking at alcohol and what it does. And with my addiction and Sexaholics Anonymous and with SLAA, I'm looking at how my behavior. But in S-anon, I'm looking at everything. No, there's no behavior. There's no agent of alcohol. It's just me. It's everything I read in that S-anon problem, feelings of being unworthwhile, feelings of feeling unlovable, So I want to share a little of my story, how the family illness permeated my life. So at a very early age, about 5 years old, my parents were very young. My dad and my mom was 15 years old when my older brother was born, and she was 17 when I was born. And my father was just a few years older than her. And I'm a middle child of 3 boys. And we grew up in a private Christian household. And my parents came from very violent backgrounds. When I was born, my dad was facing his 3rd felony charge and beat the case and turned his life around and got saved. And he was doing his own 12-step work in his faith tradition. He was bringing people from the streets, trying to get them in our faith tradition. So we had people that would stay with us sometimes. And my mom was tending to my younger brother who was just born. And my dad was always off working. He worked for big companies and he was an IT engineer. So long story short, I experienced a lot of neglect. I was always alone for most of the day. And some of the families that came and lived with us, there was one family in particular. There was a girl about my age, 5 years old. Her brother would play with my brother. They'd play video games. Me and her would do things in secret. We would be on the side of the house. I remember very vividly, she would tell me to go pick flowers for her. I'd run to the front of the house, pick flowers, come back, and she'd give me a kiss. And we would do things in secret. We would do things in the closet, in the bathroom. And I think of all the big book stories in the back of the big book where they took that first drink of alcohol and it just lit them up. That's what happened with me. I'm 5 years old. I have no idea what sex is, but I know that I just felt lit up, and it gave me that emotional validation that I was seeking outside of myself. And so we continued that behavior for a while. I started to practice it elsewhere. And I found out, the reason I bring this particular instance up is because I found out many years later, not too long ago, that the girl's father was arrested for child molestation and kidnapping. And I have to assume he was exhibiting those behaviors onto her, and she was practicing those behaviors with me. This is the family illness. sexaholism permeating from him to her to me, how it affected me. It gave me something that I think was really cool until, and so that was the first sign of sexaholism in my household, how it came to be, how it affected me. And when I was about 7, I'll just make this real short. We had a visiting pastor who did magic. I was allowed to sit in the front of the congregation. And for some reason, at the end of his sermon, when they did the altar call, I felt really moved and felt filled with guilt about what I had been doing with all these girls in private. And I took my dad up to the altar call, and I start to confess to this pastor everything that I had been doing with cousins and girls. I'm just a kid crying. I'm just telling this guy everything. And his eyes light up. He looks at my dad looks at him, and we never talk about it again. And that's where I believe the curtain dropped between me and authority figures, between me and God, I had to keep secrets. It's the shame curtain. And that's where the shame and the secrets all came in. So fast forward, my parents get divorced from infidelity in the household, and I get taken out of private school, we stop going to church, and I get put into public school. And my family dynamic changed. My mom starts to kind of revert back into going out a lot, partying, having different boyfriends. My dad showing up drunk to my mom's apartment and fighting and arguing, and just feeling so scared as a kid, just freezing up, when stuff like that would happen. And so my dad was in his alcoholic stuff. And my mom, what I learned in relationships, the first thing with the girl when I was about 5 years old, I learned that relationships were transactional. I learned that if I go do this for you, then you're going to give me something that I need. I go pick flowers, you give me a kiss. I started to learn how relationships operated. I started to have this distorted perception. And with my mom, when I came into SA and I did an inventory, I first looked at it as guys who took advantage of my mom. But that wasn't the case in S-anon. What I realized through inventory is that my mom had different boyfriends, and something that she would say to me very consistently, she would mention how the guy had a nice job and a nice car. And I learned what women wanted. I learned what my mom wanted. And I'm the guy who has a nice car and a nice job today. It has affected me. I remember seeing pictures of my mom on her phone, just nude photos. And my mom was a very promiscuous woman, and she cycled through boyfriends pretty often. So I learned that men were expendable. I learned that I was expendable, that if I don't have the good job or the good car, if I'm not good enough, then they're going to leave me. So these are the things that I carried with me as I grew up, and how the family illness affected me. All the while in public school with my own tuning out with fantasy, and, just doing my own thing with SA. I was kind of developing in that sense. And a lot of it was feelings of inferiority, feelings of not being good enough. So I covered it all up. But as I continued through school and junior high and high school, I saw how I would befriend a lot of the popular kids. I would befriend a lot of the popular men or popular boys, and we would do things in secret. I started to experience what is now domination and humiliation, boys that took advantage of me because I wanted what they had, and I was willing to go to any lengths to get it. And I wanted to be popular. And so after we would do things in secret together, they would tell me things like, if you tell anyone, I'm going to hit you, or I'm going to tell your mom. And I just remember not trusting men. I could not trust men. That's where my early signs of betrayal were. And so anyways, going through that, feeling a lot of shame, keeping secrets. And I remember just seeing behavior that I never would talk about. The family always had secrets. I remember catching my dad watching pornography when I walked into a room and he didn't see me. And instead of confronting him or saying something, I went to the kitchen and I start banging on the cabinets to make sure he can realize someone's here, and he doesn't, and he stops doing what he's doing. See, I learned that I had to minimize, keep secret, don't rock the boat, don't cause ripples, because I don't want to be confronted with conflict. So as I continue through life, some of my early relationships that I got into, carrying all these attitudes and all these belief systems about who I was and who people were to me, I got into a relationship, and it was when I was about 18. And what happened was I really saw how immature I was, how I started to see red flags come up, and I minimized the effects that other people were doing to me. There was a time where my girlfriend had a friend of hers come and watch a movie with her at night, and she would tell me things like, "We're just friends, it's no big deal." And I was so scared of being alone that I would say, "Okay, well, it's fine." And I would trust, I would really be in denial about what was going on. And so what I would do is I was the online stalker. I was the guy who was checking out the social media profiles, who's she following, who's liking her photos, who's she looking at. I was so filled with so much shame and inferiority that I was trying to control her behavior. I caught her a few times with messaging guys, and I realized that I was the S-anon in that relationship. I remember checking her phone when she would go to bed and seeing who's messaging her. And when I would get caught, I would play the victim. I would say, "Who's this guy? What are you doing?" I would give ultimatums. "You need to stop doing what you're doing or we're done." And she would stop for a while. And so these are the relationships that I attach myself to. And these were the women, because my mom was unavailable and detached, and she was the untreated sexaholic in my life, that I learned that the women that were unavailable, detached, even women that looked like my mom, I would be more attracted to them. Or I would go in the opposite way, where a woman was so needy and vulnerable that I would be able to fix them and be able to take care of their needs. Because my dad was the untreated anon. My dad was the one who was trying to make everything perfect, trying to tell everybody what they should be doing. And that was one of my main issues, is that I thought that everyone should be doing what I think they should be doing. Everyone that doesn't know what they're doing wrong, I need to make sure I tell them. And it's a disease of control. It's just like I'm powerless over sexaholism. I'm powerless over how the family illness permeated and affected me. I'm recovering from the effects, because when I'm sober, this is what I'm confronted with. I'm no longer acting out sexually. It's all the acting in. It's all the acting in that goes on in my brain, all the things that I perceive that are going on in the world. And I'm confronted with just the core of the pain that I grew up with. And like my mentor told me, that I'm afflicted with the allergy to sexaholism. I'm powerless over lust, but I'm also affected by the illness. So I do want to read something here. It's from our Al-anon Courage to Change. And because I was in so much denial about bringing up family matters, because I didn't want to become a victim. I didn't want to say, "I'm this way because they're that way." And that was the issue. But here it's on page 216 in Courage to Change. And it says here, "There was a time in my life when I furiously insisted that alcoholism or sexaholism did not exist in my family. We were normal. Everything was fine. Today, I know that alcoholism is a family disease that affects not only the drinkers, but those around them as well. Denial is a symptom of this family disease. When I began to recognize the alcoholism in my family, my unfortunate past became the topic of all my conversations. Then an Al-anon member shared about having learned to look back without staring. She pointed out how easy it can be to lose perspective, to feel trapped, to stop living in the present. Unlocking the secrets of the past can offer many gifts, but the purpose of this search is to recover from the effects of alcoholism and get on with our lives here and now. Today, with the love, support, and encouragement of Al-anon members, I am able to face the reality of the past, not to blame or wallow in self-pity, but to learn from it. There is so much to learn from the past, but I cannot allow past hurts to smolder and destroy today. Instead, I can ask my higher power to help me use my experiences to move forward and to make healthier, more loving choices than ever before. So I want to talk about my recovery today, because that was the illness, how it affected me, the problem. I have learned how to separate the person from the illness, but what now? Where do we go from here? Right? The resentments I've cleared, the amends I've made, I'm walking in the realm of the spirit, right? Acceptance is acceptance of everybody, not just me, not just you, but everything is the answer to all my problems today. Now, it's easy to say that. It's harder to live that way because I don't live in acceptance all the time. I'm an addict, right? I'm the anon and the addict. I want to control and run my life. And when I'm sober, I want to control and run your life. Justin, how are we doing on time? Do I have a few minutes?
You've got about 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay. So I'm learning to be comfortable in my own skin, because being single, I still get those thoughts of I should be with someone. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. All these old tapes that play in my head, I can turn those over. I can turn over obsession. It doesn't have to be obsession with somebody or something. What it can be is old tapes that come into my head. I turn those over. And I also have learned a lot about my character defects. Like when I was with my son's mother, when we were engaged, I was so financially dominant. I made all the decisions for us without ever consulting her. I chose what house we bought. I chose what business vehicle we purchased. I even chose her profession. She was going to work with me. I made all the major decisions without any input. I knew nothing about emotional boundaries. I did not know where I ended and other people began. I was enmeshed. So what I'm learning today is that I don't have to keep walls up. Just because my family is untreated, both in both addictions, doesn't mean I can't have relationships with them. But I'm still that little boy inside. I'm still that little boy that, I've had to learn how to set boundaries, like stop giving my brothers money, because I know where it's going. Stop, being involved in the family chaos. I've put myself outside the family bubble. And sometimes when I'm outside that bubble, I want to stay outside the bubble. I don't want to go back in and participate in life with my family. And that can also be damaging. So I'm learning to maneuver through having boundaries, but not being so rigid with my boundaries. Because some days, some things, I think of the slogan, how important is it? Some days I can tolerate more than other days. I can be around my dad. I can be around my dad. He comes over every weekend. My dad helps me with my son as a co-parent. We're getting ready to potty train my 2.5-year-old son. And my son's mother and I are good friends today. And one thing I'm learning is how to have platonic friendships with women. Because the way my relationships worked was I have sex with someone and then I find out if I really like them or not. I never knew how platonic friendship, how courtship, there's all these steps. And as a sex addict, I think of the last one, which is sexual intimacy. And I've learned that sex is optional today, but intimacy is not. Intimacy is something that I can express with other people in recovery, outside of recovery, men and women. And I don't have to get so emotionally enmeshed. I allow people to earn my trust, because I would just give my life story away to anyone who asked me, especially a woman, because I just threw everything out there. I had no idea how to keep my mouth shut. So I'm learning that. I'm learning, so just being comfortable in my own skin, learning how to be a friend, learning how to reconnect with men. That deep betrayal and distrust for men was something that I still can deal with today. And sponsoring men and being in touch with men, going golfing. I go golfing and go to church with a guy from my home group. I'm learning how to rebuild those connections and not shy away from them. For me, the relationship I have with men is much more important than the one I have with women, because I need to be able to have a balance. If I'm just the guy who is in a relationship and I have no friends that are men, well, I'm going to be very emotionally dependent on my partner for everything. And I've learned that one person cannot be my one cure-all for my emotional and spiritual needs. That's for me and my higher power. And I'll end with this, I'm out of time, is that I love the fifth step, something my Al-anon sponsor, he says, Marcus, the fifth step shows you how your relationship should operate today. He says, your relationship with God, the fifth step says, admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being. He says, your relationship with God comes first, and then God helps you with your relationship with yourself, finding that intimacy within me. And then whatever's left over, I give to another human being. So that is the threshold of my recovery today. And thanks for having me, Justin.
Marcus, that was awesome. Thank you so much for that share, for your vulnerability, and for your wisdom. In 3 years of being in the rooms of recovery, you share very powerfully, and I really appreciate that. A quick reminder to our live audience before we continue on here. If you have any questions for Marcus, please type them in the Q&A bubble at the bottom of your screen. It looks like two speech bubbles over the top of each other. And we've had a couple of questions come in, and I've written down a few. So we'll get right into that Q&A portion here, Marcus. First one is from Chaya. Chaya says, thank you so much for your vulnerable, authentic, raw share, Marcus. I'd love to hear your feedback on the following, and then this is shared. I have grown to have compassion and acceptance for myself and my mom through my step work in SLAA, and don't carry as intense of a resentment. Now, my struggle is how to stay in a calm relationship with a mentally ill, in denial, so no meds, parent who is constantly complaining about not having a partner and emotionally still in her love addiction desire mindset. How do I stay sane and in serenity while still being in vague occasional contact with her? She wants a mushier relationship, but I cannot offer that. I actually wrote down a similar question to that. So what are your thoughts on that, Marcus?
Yeah, thanks, Chaya. And congratulations, Chaya, on your big news. That's a great question. Navigating the relationships with my family. I remember when my Al-anon sponsor, when COVID hit, we were meeting at bars because they're the only place that were open. So two Al-anons meeting at a bar for step work. That's funny. And he grabbed a napkin and he told me, he says, Marcus, he drew a circle in the middle of the napkin. He goes, this is the illness. And he drew a couple circles. And he says, the first outer circle is the family. It's the closest one to the illness. And then the other one is our relationships. The other one's coworkers, strangers, and the circles went larger. He says, our illness permeates and it affects the family first. Then it affects our relationships and our coworkers. It starts to permeate outside of our lives. He said, our recovery works opposite. Our recovery works from strangers in recovery rooms that we connect with. And then we start to practice these principles with strangers, with people on the road, coworkers, and then with our family. And I think of that page on the 417 reading where it says, I should have learned to love my wife and kids first, the newcomer to AA last, but it was the other way around. So it's very hard. The reason I bring that up is it's very hard to practice these principles in the family. It's very difficult, but it's not impossible. And it's where I can see the majority of my growth and recovery, my emotional serenity. One thing I have learned was Q-tip, which is quit taking it personal. That was an acronym that I use. And I think I use a lot of slogans when it comes to that. I say the serenity prayer because like it said in the S-anon problem, any personal criticism was a threat. Soon as my dad would open his mouth, I just wanted him to shut the hell up. I could not stand anything. With the resentment gone, when I'm able to see that my dad is talking out of illness, he's talking out of all these things that I see in myself, they're all the things that I've done. And I'll share this real quick. Having that relationship with my dad is seeing myself as my dad. And I'll share one example how I saw that. I had an awakening. And this was not too long ago. My brothers are both untreated. One of them struggles with homelessness, my older brother. And my dad is the savior. He lets him stay in his house, gives him rides, gives him money. But he can't live with my brother. So my dad's living in hotels. And he tells me, I want your brother to change. And I said, I didn't say anything, but why would I change if I'm getting my rent paid, getting money, getting free rides? I'm not going to change. Life's good. But what I saw how my dad couldn't see his issues with my brother, how he was enabling. And I'll share with you, I saw myself as my dad when I was with my son at my church. I was getting balloons for the kids all set up, all these toddlers running around, and they're all pushing each other. And my son gets pushed and he starts crying. And I get real upset. I walk into this wave of toddlers. I pick my son up. I grab water balloons for him. I give him the water balloons. I place them on the ground in safe ground. And I'm doing the same thing my dad's doing. I'm not allowing my son to deal with the pain of life, getting pushed around. I want to protect my son, and I want to do for him what he can't do for himself. I'm playing God. My dad's playing God. I'm playing God. So my relationship with him is to know that I'm more like him than unlike him. And I can detach with love, and I'll stop there. I can go on and on and on. So having good boundaries.
Good stuff. Thank you, Marcus. One of the phrases, the stereotypical phrases, came to mind as you were sharing that experience about your son and your brother and everything. Living life on life's terms. I accept now that I can live life on life's terms, but I'm still tempted to not allow others to have to live life on life's terms. Mm. And I love how you shared, that savior complex type thing. Very good. Thank you for sharing that. That opened my eyes to a bunch of stuff. All right. I've got another question here. And this one is one that I'm very curious about. And I've talked to a few people with this, but how does cross membership in SA and S-anon help you? What additional doors does that open for you than just being, a member of one of those?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I had some real big spiritual growing pains in all of them, because I think I'm experiencing miracles in SA. And I went through that phase that I believe everyone goes through, where I'm judging all the new guys. I'm judging guys in meetings. They're not doing it right. They're not working the steps right. That guy's an idiot. I'm being so judgmental. And I went through that phase in SA, and I tempered down and realized that, I'm just one of many. I'm not the one. I can get an ego even in recovery. Al-anon, I went through the same thing. I tried throwing my brother into AA. I tried throwing my dad into Al-anon. And I remember telling my dad, my sponsor, he said something that made me laugh. I told him about a problem I was having, and he says, he says, that problem, he goes, it's funny. He goes, there's a common denominator to all those problems. I said, yeah. He goes, it's you. And then I told my dad that. I tried using that line on my dad. It did not end well. He said, what? He said, no. He goes, for you, Marcus, I get it. You were the problem. But me, so I learned that not weaponizing recovery. And I went through that phase in Al-anon, and I've tempered down in Al-anon. I've stopped the whole, hoorah. And S-anon, I went through that just recently. I was trying to get all the guys in SA and S-anon. I'm like, dude, we all belong in S-anon. I'm trying to argue with old timers and, but my S-anon sponsor says, Marcus, this program works for you. You don't have to try to throw it at other people. They're in recovery. I have to realize, again, I'm not God, that I don't know what's best for other people, that I was guided to S-anon, but it doesn't mean that other people need to come into S-anon. So that is how cross membership works. SA and S-anon, I will say, I thought of Al-anon and S-anon as women programs. I thought of them as spouse programs, that I need to be married to an alcoholic or a sexaholic to be in these anons. No, it's a family illness. Tradition 3 in either of these programs says, as long as you know someone with a sexual problem or with alcohol problem. Now, we all know someone. We all qualify for membership. I sponsor sex addicts. So I know someone. So that is the distinguishing factor. S-anon, someone, and I'll end with this. Someone told me in S-anon, he says, Marcus, SA, working the steps in SA is like getting your bachelor's degree in recovery. S-anon is like getting your freaking PhD in recovery. It's just so much deeper to the core of just betrayal and, all these things that I played the victim about. And I get to look more closely at the family illness, which in recovery, we can still be, I can still be self-centered. I thought I was the pioneer of sex addiction in the family. I'm the sex addict. I'm the problem, which is true. I'm the problem of all, I need to focus on my side of the street, focus on myself, but I'm not the pioneer of sexaholism in the family. I was affected by it before I became afflicted by it. And that's what S-anon helps me deal with. So.
Thank you so much for sharing those additional insights into things. You're opening my eyes to some things. Now, early in your share, you mentioned something about going into these meetings and being the shark, and your sponsor or somebody there at the meeting said, Marcus, you're not the shark, you're the chum. Tell me a little bit about how that lights turned on in your head and how that has affected you moving forward, that little insight and that truth nugget.
Okay. Yeah. My SA sponsor, my old SA sponsor told me that when I was, kind of dumping on him and we were doing step work together. And it was this slow realization that I am the chum in the water, that being what we call an SA as being lusted after is really, I am so afraid of being alone. I remember when I was 19, I had my apartment, I was working a job. I could never be alone on my days off. I always had to make sure someone was with me, a woman. I was trying to, but I saw it as being a bachelor or whatever, but I was so afraid of being alone. So I give my power away to other people. I make people God and I make God people. And I like in the 12 and 12, where Bill says in the fourth step, he says, the primary fact we fail to recognize is that we don't know how to have a real relationship with another human being. Either I dominate and control, or I'm subservient and I allow other people to dominate me. I switch. I learned relationships were transactional, and it was really a monarchy. Either I was in control or you were. And that was the nature of all my relationships. Even today, I've dabbled in dating, and there was a lot of red flags that would come up. And I thought, I'm just not ready right now. A women that were very needy, that would say things like, you're making me feel this way. And they would shame me and blame me if I didn't call them in 2-3 days. So I saw a lot of neediness. And I have to ask myself the question, why is it that Marcus is attracted to needy women? What is it about me? I'm the common denominator. What is it about me that's bringing this out? And I attract my emotional and spiritual equal. I'm still healing. And that is knowing that if I find someone who's emotional and needy, I'll get sucked up into their lives because I want to be lost in someone else's problems. I don't want to look at mine. And that is being the chum in the water, getting swallowed up.
One of the thoughts with that crossed my mind as you were sharing that. Initially, I thought the chum in the water, I would be a victim if I'm the chum in the water. Mm-hmm. But I'm chum with with self-will, with agency. I'm putting myself out there. And is a willful piece of bait, is it a victim? No, I think it's a lure. I think it's put in there to trap somebody. So I'm still being, and not to use the word predator loosely, but I'm still the one that is putting that out there. And I think that's really important to see, at least for me. So thank you for sharing that again. I'm getting some good stuff here, Marcus. Thank you so much. You also mentioned, and once again, a reminder to our live audience, if you have questions, type them in the Q&A window at the bottom of your Zoom window. We'll be happy to get to those. You mentioned hey, when I first went into an SA room, you were the youngest one there. and the thought of I'm not as bad as these guys. And I've talked to other people who go into these rooms and say, well, these guys are nowhere near what I've done. I'm a mess. This room won't work for me. And it's the same both ways. I'm not as bad, or I'm way worse than. How do you get past that type of thinking and move into healthy recovery when you go into these rooms?
Awesome. Yeah, the leveling of pride. It sometimes I like the spiritual appendix in the back of the big book because it comes to us over time. I'm the educational variety. I came in with so much pride, which was covering up all my fears, because I slowly came out of denial about I crossed gender boundaries, species boundaries, legal boundaries. I was probably, it wasn't about being more sick or less sick. It was about realizing that I'm powerless over this addiction. And for me, powerlessness is not something that I can admit verbally. It's something I have to experience inwardly. Because in our literature in the big book, it says we had to concede to our innermost self. For me, that took going to a lot of meetings to realize I'm a real sexaholic. I can't control and enjoy it. I had to burn a few more logs. I had to realize that I'm hitting a wall. And finally, like I said, the bottom that I experienced was I quickly got into another relationship after my son's mother left me. And I started to wander, lust outside of that relationship. And she was quote unquote perfect, made as much money as I did, beautiful. And I realized I was powerless. The next one wouldn't save me. And I hit that wall. So for me, it had to be taking my own life. That was kind of where my leveling of pride, it fell from me. And I finally started to work the steps. And there was still struggles with conception of God, I learned a lot about God and how my misunderstanding of God was getting in the way of allowing him in to my heart. And for me, the center, like with most people that come into the rooms, I have to understand what the core issue is. I think it's the relationship. I'm trying to get her off my back. I think it's my money problems. I think it's all these issues. I think it's because I'm schizophrenic or I'm bipolar, all these things I get diagnosed with. But in the 9th step promises, it tells me all those things get dealt with for the most part through working the steps, all the things I come in with, which I won't repeat the 9th step promises, but it took time for me to finally realize that. About a year of going to meetings.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that. And what you shared there about your perception of God. I actually have a question based on that. You mentioned in your share about how your interactions with people through your youth and childhood shifted your beliefs and influenced your beliefs in life. Did those also influence your beliefs in God? And if so, how have you come back around, or how are you coming back around to maybe seeing God a little bit more clearly, not as influenced by the experiences you've had with others in your life?
Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. I remember I went through a few experiences with that. I remember my sponsor, I was sitting at his house and we're talking, and he says, Marcus, you're a sales guy. You like to hit your numbers. You like to chase after things. And I said, yeah, I like to. He goes, what if you're really running away from something? And I said, oh yeah, I'm running away from fear. I'm running away from financial insecurity. And he said, no, those are attitudes and emotions that are inside of you and ideas. He says, what if you're really running away from God? And that was kind of the start to, and we started talking about God. I loved church as a kid. I loved to go to church before I had that issue with the pastor that came up. And I had these healthy fantasies of singing for the church and performing. I was the kid in front of the church service that was raising his hand, fearlessly. I loved God. I had a relationship. But when that curtain dropped, when the shame hit me, I could not trust authority figures, meaning I put all that on God. God was a shameful God. He was untrustworthy with everything. I had to keep secrets. He was out to get me. And I was unimportant. And so I carried all those beliefs with me. And growing up, I don't think there's anyone who hasn't been drilled into this thinking of, this is your life. This is only you can live it. You have to do this. You got to get a good job. You got to go to school. You got to get, you. There's so much weight put on me that God's out of the picture, self-will. And also knowing I tried God, it didn't work. I was agnostic when I came in. And it wasn't until step 2 and when I worked in S-anon that I had a very deep, my sponsor, man, he hit me straight to the heart, because there was a question we were reviewing in step 2 in S-anon, and it said, were there any reservations about God, or some kind of question? And I said, yes. I just said it out loud. I said, admitting that I'm insane is, I don't like that, because it implies I'm imperfect. And we talked about the topic of perfectionism. And he said, Marcus, he said, your son's 2, right? I said, yeah. He goes, you love your son unconditionally. I said, yeah. He goes, whatever he does, you won't stop loving him. I said, yeah. He goes, why don't you write a letter to your son and explain to him the nature of your love for him, how you'll never stop loving him, no matter what he does, who he becomes. I wrote the letter. I cried like a baby. I read it to him. And then after I read it to him, the next time we met, he says, okay, why don't you cross out everywhere it says your son's name and put your name? And you sign the letter by God. And God loves me no matter what I do. He loves me no matter what I've done. And he'll never stop loving me, whoever I become. And it was this deep connection with a power greater than myself, to know that there is a presence of God in my life today. And sometimes it doesn't feel like it's there, but it's because I start to wander off. I chase after something when I'm really running away from God. Urgency. So I think that answered the question.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I love that exercise that you did with the letter to your son and then to yourself by crossing out his name. Got another question that came in from our live audience. And if I butcher this name, I apologize. Denere asks, what experience could you share on a few acronyms that have helped you in recovery? Maybe HALT or KISS or Q-tip, as you shared earlier, or any of the other ones.
A lot. Well, the slogans help me a lot. So halt's, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, sad, or sick or stressed. Those are some key ones. Those are really key things for me today. Am I dehydrated? Am I, when I start feeling foggy in the head, I know that I got to take care of my basic needs. Self-care. I learned in the Anon programs that self-care is not selfishness. I learned to distinguish the difference, and I got to take care of those basic needs, because driving angry is the same as driving drunk. Driving tired, driving sleepy is the same as driving drunk, right? I can still do everything the addict does in my life, my family, like my brother driving drunk. I can do the same thing. So making sure I'm taking care of my basic needs so I can give more to others. The slogans that I've been really using recently with a lot of grief, I didn't know how grief worked. I was confusing grief with self-pity. Like, why am I crying? Like after a meditation, my day's perfect. Why are these tears coming out? And I realized that the body keeps the score, anniversaries, birthdays, the loss of the family I once had, to be engaged, to be married. There's a lot of grief. There's a loss of a dream of what I thought my life was going to be. There's a loss of, when I accept that alcoholism is an illness or sexaholism is an illness that I have no power over, there's a loss. There's grief that comes with that. I can't do anything to fix my brothers. So realizing with grief, this too shall pass. The slogan, this too shall pass. When I'm with family, how important is it? Live and let live, let go and let God. Like, I got to use those slogans all the time. And so those are some of the things that I carry with me today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marcus. As we begin to wrap up here, do you have any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with us before I close us out here?
Yeah, I just, I would like to share how I'm just really grateful to be able to share these stories, to know that everything that happened in my past, I like page 124 in the big book, where it says that my dark past, I cling to that thought. My dark past is the key to freedom for someone else, for another suffering addict, to know that I don't have to, I have choices today. Marcus, that grew up in the family illness, I didn't have many choices then, but today I have choices. I'm powerless over all these addictions, including my own, but I'm not powerless over being an asshole. I'm not powerless over my what I do with my behaviors today. And it's redirected willpower. It's redirected imagination. It's redirected intimacy. Where am I getting all these met? Am I giving it to my higher power, or am I giving it to people? So one thing, and people, I remember asking the same question, how do I distinguish the difference between self-will and God's will? And for me, it was a very simple thing. It was urgency. If I feel an urgent need to do something right now, it's probably self-will, because I need to pause. I need to ask for an intuitive thought. And a lot of meditation and conscious contact and writing helps me get into that conscious contact with my higher power. That's where my recovery is at today. Thy will be done. So it's just continuing to turn that over and know that I'm still going to make mistakes. I'm still going to fall short of the ideal. I'm still human, and I'm still worthy of my higher power's love, no matter what I do. So carrying it all with me, but not allowing it to weigh me down. I'm giving it away. So those are the last thoughts I have.
Beautiful. Thanks again, Marcus. That was a great RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your question, or if you have other questions, please go to rico12.com/forum and join in our community and ask those questions and answer others' questions that will come up. I invite the audience to come back next week. If you've not yet gone to rico12.com and submitted your email address, please get on the invitation list so you can join us live each Friday at noon Central Time. Next week, we will be hearing from Robin R., whose meeting was pre-recorded, as next week my son will be getting married and I won't be able to record live. But Robin's topic will be perseverance, and it's a good one. All right, now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the 7th step prayer that Marcus will be saying for us.
My Creator, I am now willing you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Marcus. Everybody keep coming back. It works when I work it, so work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of